Hello, folks. Welcome to Market Trends. I'm David Russell, Global Head of Market Strategy at TradeStation. It's great to be back with everyone. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. So, as usual, just start with a few disclosures. Market is just glacial and dead today. But as the saying goes, never short a dull market. And I think it's one of those things to kind of see that we appear to be in the stage that we've talked about of stock picking. Low volatility, low correlation. The market goes through these cycles. Let me just start off by showing you the standardized returns of certain ETFs that we may look at. I'm going to also include some links in the chat. And these also include links to the prospectuses if you're interested. Some of these ETFs we may use. We use it for benchmarking more than anything else. And one of the things that we've kind of talked about is the way that the market goes through these cycles of volatility and stock picking. And look at the S&P here. This is our workspace for the S&P. And essentially this is now a period of extremely low volatility. The basic idea is that when when things crash, they crash in unison with high volatility. And in those moments, indexes can be more useful. And then when things are entering a period of low volatility calm like we have now, it can make more sense to be looking at the individual stocks. And that's a lot what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to just actually start off by just mentioning a few things. I did not have time to do a blog post this time. So you go to Insights. We'll have that back next week. We'll share our workspaces again next week. But this is our blog. We don't really have anything all that noteworthy to really point out. I mean, it was interesting with the crypto thing, but a lot of that now, the question is, people might wonder if that's somewhat priced in. It is interesting, though, to look at what we see here in terms of, I'm sorry, of NVIDIA, because we did a trading view ID here on NVIDIA, and you might want to check out our trading view ideas. I'm going to actually share the link to that as well. And some of these trading view ideas recently have been kind of interesting. And in particular, some of the ones we did recently, things like Roblox. I mean, these are some of the things that are kind of interesting, but check out a name here like Roblox. And these are just the things we always talk about. Basically this stock had really, rallied and pulled back, but a lot of the methods we used that we talk about all the time in this webinar had kind of, identified our DLX. So it's interesting that this is, it had pulled back. It was holding that 21-day exponential moving average, and it had recently made a 52-week high. We did a trading view ID on it down here, and it pushed higher. So I wanted to just kind of mention that. But it's interesting to look. I mean, we did one on something like Skechers as well. And, again, it had this like falling trend line. It just ripped through that. This is the kind of market where these random stocks are ripping. And so it's just it's an interesting sort of environment. And for a lot of these, we want to be doing things like looking to potentially the MA tools. We also have in the workspace, and I'm going to share this next time. I just don't have the blog set up this time for it. But if we go to this workspace, this kind of shows stocks that are hitting the highest levels in certain long periods of time. So it's interesting to look here that names like Apple is just breaking out into new record territory. It's interesting that a stock like Cisco also is just sneaking higher. But what has been interesting, and I'm not sure there's any examples this today, but I want to remind you of this workspace, because look at a stock like SQ block. We were talking about when it was sneaking higher back here, when it started breaking upward. And there's a lot of these random forgotten stocks that are they've been coming back. And this is what I mean by a stock picking environment. So this is where we are now, that things like the indexes and the sectors might not be quite as meaningful at this moment. But there are some interesting things to mention. One of them I got to just mention really quickly is Fastly. This is a company that at one point was a really like intense moving stock, and there was some news recently where one of its rivals apparently went bankrupt or something, and there's been a bunch of analyst notes how it's going to improve their business. It's an unusual company, but the thing is, this company, when it has moved in the past, it's been an interesting one. FSLY. We're just finding these things that are popping up in a lot of the individual areas. That's where it is. It's like the small companies now, because that's the kind of market that we're in right now. So tomorrow we have non-farm payrolls in the morning. And so let's just take a look at, I'll just start off by going over here and looking at the 10-year treasury yield, because I think it's important to realize here that we have this sort of setup where we broke above this trend line here, but I think the key thing to remember is that on the longer term here, we still have a series of lower highs, and at this point, there is some signs also. Look over on Trading View. Let me just show you this. Well, I don't have the key thing is this is the dollar index. This is a weekly chart of the dollar index. And so the dollar index is now kind of, at this high from back in last year. So I think the thing is now we are potentially setting up for a situation where, we priced in a lot of dollar strength. And now maybe the trade is simply that peaks and maybe we see a move to the downside here in the dollar. I want to just point that out because right now, 10-year might have peaked. Claims today were high, jobless claims today were higher than expected. The economic data has been strong, but it's not like mind-blowingly strong. We do see things like the GDP now from Atlanta Fed continuing to push higher. But if we also look kind of the individual reports like jobless claims today and things like that, they haven't been absolutely incredibly strong. The Institute for Supply Management data, for example, the service data was pretty weak. The payrolls data from ADP was kind of weak. So, overall here, and it's not a question about having a really strong thesis like, oh, the U.S. economy is weakening. It's just that we've priced in a lot of strength in the dollar, and now we're at the high, and maybe now with just the pendulum swinging back, the thing that we might see now is dollar weakness and weak dollar trades. And I think that's just kind of, we always got to be thinking about that because it's been very interesting recently. Look over here on our key ETFs, is that we've seen a lot of strength recently. Strangely, I'm trying to see if it's even here in the silver miners, which I don't see. I'm not sure I have it on this one, but the key thing is that it's just strange to see things like gold and silver trying to kind of move. And so again, I'm just pointing out that there might be a little bit of a sense here of the dollar having peaked, everything being priced in on the kind of strong, economy side, high rates, the hawkish thing. That pendulum might have swung all the way. And so it's just a question now of looking for where the next opportunity might be. I've just noticed that when we get into these really strong, broad bull markets, is that basically things don't stay weak for long. And that's an interesting example. For example, if you look at things like, the XLK. The XLK basically had this double top, and then it just kind of held and it just shot higher. Um, a lot of the sort of relative weakness, like things like semiconductors, they just try and come off the lows. So I want to just kind of point that out right now that we're at a spot where we've swung one way on things like rates, on things like the dollar, and now the pendulum might just kind of swing back. But it's all kind of individual stuff. I want to just point that out because payrolls tomorrow, if you look at something like the gold miner ETF, this is something where again probably wait and watch, but you can see it squeezing into this sort of range here. There was this lot of negativity with gold getting slammed here. This was after Trump got elected and all this stuff happened. But the thing now is if it's a soft number tomorrow, this might be something where if we get a breakout, above this, people might actually look for that to somewhat extend and have some space here to the upside, maybe retrace some of this decline. So I think we just have to realize that it's interesting to see this kind of holding here. This is like a pregnant moment where you look at things like gold miners are trying to hold, 10-year treasury yield is sitting right kind of at this level. And now the thing is, a soft number tomorrow might drive this down, might drive the dollar down, and might drive things like gold up. And that's just kind of a way to look at the kind of probabilities that are facing us now. I wanted to show some interesting other things that popped up to me. I was doing some scans and I found, for example, Wells Fargo. It's interesting to see the way that these banks have kind of pulled back after these really strong runs. And so I was looking at Wells Fargo, and for example, a person WFC, a person might kind of be looking at the options chain in December, just to kind of look at some of these things, and they might actually see it was Wells Fargo around kind of 74. If a person wanted to say that, it's going to, like, say you think it's going to go to a new high, say you think that it's going to just kind of continue strong into kind of the middle of December, a call spread, people might look at something like a call spread in this and something like the 76, 78. The overall cost of this is if you click on the ask on the 76 and you click on the 78, that has a cost of under 50 cents. And when you kind of have the pullback in this, the potential of something like, if we have a relatively soft number and a drop in yields tomorrow, what does that do to the banks and financials after this move with this pullback? And I think we want to just kind of point that out because this is something of a trend here. Now, another name that popped up on my list, I was doing some scans. I was looking for stocks that hit 52-week highs recently that had pulled back sharply. We've shown you how to do these scans before. But what's interesting that this name is Fiserv. Now, we had done FI. We had done a trading view idea on this way back here when it started breaking out of this like multi-month consolidation period. I think back in July, if you look, and it's really been a mover. Today it's dropping because its CEO is being considered by Trump to run, I believe, the Social Security Administration, and apparently he's a highly respected executive. And people say, oh, if he leaves the company, that's a negative and all that. But again, sometimes you get these news events, people have a panic, and then that turns into an opportunity. So I think if you look at a name like this, I mean, this is a company that does some kind of services for banks. It has had a very strong, growth trajectory. Does a stock that's doing well like this, like suddenly, I mean, is it possible that like there's other executives in the company? Is it possible that, you're talking about a member of the S&P 500 and everything? Is it really possible that the entire business is going to fall apart because I mean, he's probably a great executive, but again, when you think about it overall, is this one of those opportunities where the panic fear is simply something that gives an opportunity for people to enter a name that's in an interesting trend? So I wanted to mention this one. Look at this on the weekly chart. I mean, this stock on the weekly has been, it's a very interesting sort of breakout there. And you look at this in the context of an uptrend. I mean, I don't know. This is erasing here, 1, 2, 3, like 4 or 5 weeks of gains got erased in a couple of days for something that is just a news event sort of thing. So I want to point that one out. Now, one of the things that I have kind of noticed is that some of these Kathy Wood stocks have been moving recently. Roblox was one of those, but another one recently has been Roku. So there was an interesting analyst note on this stock that basically talked about. Let me see if I actually keep if I had it here, but it was an interesting sort of note that basically from Needham that talked about the fact that it has this sort of like base of data, customer data, and it might have the ability to turn that into to be monetized better. A potential, it talks about potential of this having certain kinds of potential deals involving this company. And this is just one analyst talking, but I want to just kind of point this out because there's a company that when you look at it, look at how the 200-day moving average, they're all close together, the 200, the 50. There's a stock on the weekly that really has not been doing anything for a very long time. And in this kind of market, these are some of the names that people sometimes look to. And I want to just point that out because look at what Square, or Block as it's now called. I mean, this stock was also just kind of languishing, and then a few things got interesting, and here we are. And we had talked about that. Roku might be another name like that. There have been many names like this. I mean, look at a name like PayPal. It was just like, people would, hate you if you talked about PayPal, and then it kind of rallied off the lows. Names like eBay as well. These were stocks that have turned into real interesting kind of turnarounds despite being really unpopular. So I want to just kind of mention that because these are the kind of smaller kind of niche stories that emerge in this kind of market environment. So I'm just kind of looking on my other screen, market just kind of sitting and drifting. All right, now Nvidia. I know you mentioned the trading view idea in Nvidia. And another one that has had some interesting news recently has been Snap. Now, we did a blog post on this because Snap had some bullish call buying. Look at this article right here. But I want to just mention that because there's another stock that had a good earnings report. It has some analyst chatter talking about the fundamentals might be better than people think. Again, it's one of these kind of niche, small sort of names. It had some interesting call buying. So I wanted to just kind of mention this one as well. When you look at it, there it is right at the 50-day, the 200-day. They're all close together. It's gone nowhere for a long time. And this is another one of these names where if it has, some kind of turnaround potential, it doesn't have a lot of, long-term lovers. So there's a lot of potential for a stock like this to be rediscovered and to become more interesting. So this is one also. There was one interesting analyst note. There was a good earnings report. There was some call buying. So I want to mention that one. So another thing we've talked about here is the ongoing, issues with energy, and that really does remain in effect. We talked about the supply glut, and we did this here on Halliburton. So, I think right now OPEC Plus, they really pushed off increasing oil production till next year. But I think we still have to just realize here is that the overall situation in energy, this still be setting up for a breakdown. This is crude oil futures, and if we look here, drawing to the trend line on this, I mean, you can look at this, and I mean, it is trying to kind of hold here, but this is it's hard to really say exactly because oil has a lot of strange things. I mean, you have to be kind of an expert on the actual dynamics of the crude market itself, but this is squeezing together, and there are always kinds of unpredictable. I mean, there's just these random things that happen when with energy, with especially when the winter heating oil season comes in and stuff. There are kind of internals that change, but I think we've talked a lot about the underlying structural issues with energy, and it's in this tight kind of range here. I think we need to watch because if this starts to break to the downside, I mean, this could be something where we've talked about the fact that it could really have some space. There's other times when we've talked about this weekly pattern where it was just kind of squeezing and then it just broke back in 14. And, this is kind of interesting with Trump coming in, promising to do lots of oil. And, again, the geopolitical situation, I mean, any kind of, I mean, it's not even clear what's happening with that, but none of it is turning into a sort of crisis. So I think we want to kind of continue watching as maybe a clear downside thing in being in energy. So we had done this trading view idea on Halliburton. If you look at it, we notice how it hit this resistance level. And now it's already breaking that bear flag. But when you look at a name like this, that's a kind of a lower high, but there could be space down toward even 27 or something on a name like this. So we look here on Halliburton. We look at an Option Station Pro. For this name, here is a stock up around a little over 30. But on this case, someone might kind of say, what happens if it goes down under 29? A person might look in December and say something like the 29 and a half puts and the 28 and a half puts. That's 25 cents essentially for a $1 wide put spread. In a name that, I mean, you look at it, I mean, technically, it seems to have some negative things happening. So I wanted to just kind of mention these are some of the things that are popping up, and like in a market like this, we don't not really get anything super thematic. It's a lot of random one-off stuff. So, all right, let me continue to go with this, and I'm going to now dig in to some of the things we see with our key ETFs. We had talked about, some time ago, we did basically, our trading view, our webinar was essentially chips are dead and everything else is coming together. And it's interesting just to kind of look here and see the way that semiconductors, in the last month have really lagged, well, even look at today. I mean, they tried to rally yesterday. And I think we just have to realize, I mean, this is, I don't know. Look at these lower highs in the weekly. So I think we're in a period here where we still kind of have this trend underway of semiconductors. The NVIDIA has some interesting things happening. In fact, just today, NVIDIA had, there's an article saying that NVIDIA is ahead of schedule on some kind of new architecture that's beyond Blackwell. Apparently, it's going to come out potentially, according to this one report I saw, it could come out 3 months to 6 months earlier than expected. It's called Rubin. So NVIDIA has some patterns we had talked about in the trading view idea. Essentially, the fact that it's been holding. This was a level that was interesting. This high from August, it more or less held repeatedly. So it held this level around 131, 131, 131. So old resistance, potentially new support. But when you look beyond that, the only other name in the chip space that seemed to have Broadcom was also in a little bit of a spot where it is above things like its 100-day moving average and things like that. But I want to just kind of point this out because we continue to see a weight in the semiconductors and then a lot of strength in sort of other areas of things widening out. Um, Now, as we kind of dig down and look at where the individual sectors are going, I think we can kind of see here that financials, continue to have this financials and the small caps are the leaders in the last month. So, it is interesting to kind of look here and look at something like the financials. I mean, the one that really grabbed my attention was what's happening with the banks right now. If you look at the financials here, look at the XLF. Now, on our state of the market, which we did on Monday, we had more or less talked about it, kind of digging around and languishing. That was back on Monday. And we basically said that it was, people might look for it to kind of just drift and later in the week to give an entry at at a level somewhere around the previous week's low. And if you look at it here, I mean, it's gone under the previous week's low, but it's essentially just kind of, pulling back, but in the context of an uptrend still. So at this time, I'm looking at some of the things when we look here at we actually look on radar screen, we're seeing that the strength continues to be in some of these things like the financials, software over semiconductors, and then a lot of the smaller sort of names that have been continuing to outperform. Things like airlines. It's very interesting. If we look in the last month, airlines have been. Wait a second. Let me add those. They fell off this list. Airlines have been very much leading, and it continues to be a lot of these kind of individual small level stories and not the overall macro thing. Now, if we go to our price grid, I'm going to actually go to MA tools. Let's just see here if we have any stocks that have pulled back and giving any kind of opportunities here. We can see stocks here maybe pulling back to the rising 21-day moving average, and I'm just looking here, and wow, this is it's taking a second to load this. This could be like Invesco. I mean, not very active. So let's actually go back and sort with our average options volume here. All right, look for stocks that trade at least 10,000 contracts a day. And now we can go and look for companies that have pulled back to interesting levels. Like, for example, these companies, AMD, for example, let's see what this is doing. All these remain in a kind of not very bearish setup. But what else we have? American Express. So you can see these things starting to kind of pop up. See, this is telling us that the 50-day moving average is above the 200-day, and it's pulling back. A name even here like Best Buy is an interesting sort of setup when you look at this. I look at this, and I think if we see that it's basically, it looks like it's starting to form a longer term uptrend. It had an earnings report back here, so this is one now that's popping up on from this scan that's kind of interesting. Looking just down the list, look at a name like McDonald's here. It's been in this period of kind of neutral sideways movement, but look at it as a gap up here. So people might actually say, you know what, here's a company that's really gone sideways for several months. But this is one I think we might want to look for a gap. We can get back over 303. So these are just some of the ways you can kind of dig around using these tools. Let's look also over at Price Grid. And let's look for the companies now that made 52-week highs in the last month. So we go down here, 52-week high, greater or less than 21. Okay, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to put in my label row, add label row, and now I'm going to do just a simple pullback. Of these stocks, who's down the most in the last week? Old Dominion Freight Lines. That's an interesting one. It's one of these. I mean, that's interesting, but we can also see it right on the list. There's a name like Fiserv pulling back, FI. So that's interesting. Now there was another stock that had done well after Trump got elected, which was XPO. It's another ship. It's a trucking stock. This one is still kind of near its high. Nothing really jumping out on that. Let's look on the last week. Who might have pulled back? You can see the Old Dominion Freight Lines again. Baker Hughes. Interesting. That stock had an interesting rally. That's an energy name. Looking at things even here like Texas Instrument. Wow, look at this. This actually looks like a false breakout. This was one of the few chip names that had kind of managed to hang in there, and it really just failed. Anyway, so this is what it's, essentially the kind of stock picking environment that we're in right now. And I want to just kind of mention that some of the themes that have, kind of appeared to me right here that seemed interesting was, for example, what I said about the banks and the potential for a kind of dollar sort of weakness. The potential of something like the pullback in FI and the potential for further downside in energy. I know I've been talking about it for a long time, but if you look overall at energy, um, it had this attempt to rally after Trump. Also, the idea that, oh, he's going to put these big sanctions on Iran and all that stuff. But ultimately, I think we're in an environment here where the global, situation for energy remains very weak, and the big opportunity for people looking for something might really be the potential for that, that triangle coming together in crude oil. So it's kind of always looking around some of the things that are out there and kind of jumping out to us. It is interesting to see also just the breakout that we had in Apple. And what was interesting to me was, again, when something kind of gets up and it makes a new high, then it just pushes to new highs. Now, as I look at Apple, at this point, I think people might want to be kind of waiting and watching. This is one also where you have things like that EMA test. If you use this workspace and you go over here and you say, I want to be watching a bunch of stocks like, for like Apple or, Amazon. We had done a trading view idea on Amazon, and Amazon essentially, we had done a trading view idea down here and it just shot to new highs. And another one was, look at like Meta. So all these now are extended. Actually, go to MA tools. And what you want to, what people might think about doing is, if you look at something like this, when it does pull back, it'll light up down here when it pulls back to that 8-day EMA or something like that. So these are some of the different tools that we have available, and we're going to be sharing with you guys next week. So I hope everyone has a great day. We'll be back on Monday with our state of the market when we look at the overall sectors and things like that. And remember, we had talked on Monday about the potential for an entry later in the week into something like financials, and that might have panned out. So again, on Monday, this coming Monday, the 9th, we're going to be covering some more of those indexes and those sectors, and potentially we might see other sort of things like that popping up. But don't forget, payrolls in the morning are the big thing to watch. Hope everyone has a great day, and I'll see you next week.